All right, I've been dooming a lot lately. I've really been at a loss looking at everything that's going on, figuring out, gee, how does something good come out of this? And I've I've done some thinking, and I'm not going to say that I'm optimistic, but I've come up with sort of an optimistic scenario, a reason to be somewhat hopeful. All hope is not lost. This is not, the worst time to be alive in human history by far. And frankly, we know that the elite class, whom we are at odds with across the West, is fundamentally incompetent and overzealous, as well as just plain arrogant. I think it's clear at this point that the plan is for them to seize power through collapsing our current economic, political, and social order. That much is clear. As if the name Great Reset, wasn't enough to tell you that they're trying to completely, start us over from scratch. Their actions since March of 2020 have revealed plainly that the only explanation for their actions is a motivation of destruction and devastation. Now, I didn't used to think it could get this bad because I had too much faith in the intelligence of our elite class. I thought they could never try and really blow up society because they know that that would backfire on them, that they could never control that chaos and, really make it work to their benefit. They are already so powerful as it is, they would be better off just trying to milk the cow. And therefore, they could not do so much damage as to collapse the system because they're already at the head of the system. Why would they want to destroy a system that they control? And the answer is that they are psychotic. These are sociopaths who cannot stand that they lack even the tiniest bit of control over your life. Yes, they control our current political and economic system, but it's not enough for them. They want more. They want to own you. They want to own your body. And they want to own every single one of your worldly possessions. They want to own your car, your house. They want to own all of the farmland. They want everything. They're not content with just being, infinitely richer than the rest of us. They want to be gods. You've heard in recent interviews Donald Trump's son-in-law talk about this. He thinks he's going to be immortal. The man is a vampire, just like the rest of them. Western leaders have simply gone mad. And once you recognize this, I think they become less threatening. Because I cannot see any rational human being taking these actions and thinking that they're going to win. They're essentially floundering. Their money and power has gone to their heads, and they're locked into their little cliques like the World Economic Forum. Their little echo chambers where they talk to each other about how they're going to achieve world domination and global totalitarianism. But if they achieve their short-term goals in bringing about the collapse of Western civilization, do you think that the masses of the West are going to turn to the people like Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and John Podesta or Boris Johnson, I guess now I should say Liz Truss, and say, please save me? No, they're going to be furious with those people because they are the ones very clearly who are orchestrating the collapse. That's becoming clear to more and more people as the days go by. And so if they've chosen to make themselves an enemy of the people, you don't turn to your enemy seeking salvation. The idea here, as crazy as it sounds, is that if they just destroy Western society and make life completely unlivable, people will say, you know what, gosh, I may not have supported the Great Reset before, but considering how bad things are now, I'd much rather, live in the Great Reset than Mad Max. And that's simply not the case. You're going to have no way of organizing that. They're simply going to just blow it all up. And from then, yes, we will be in a very, very bad position. We're going to be broke. We're not going to have energy. You're not going to have lights on. How untold millions will die. I mean, think about people with diabetes. I believe insulin requires refrigeration. Think about it. If the electricity goes out, you lose refrigeration. Pretty sure all those people would, die fairly quickly. I mean, there were diabetics who lived, in the eras before refrigeration. Pretty sure there have always been diabetic people. But there are, and I'm just using this as an example. I'm not trying to make this whole video about diabetes. It's just the first thing that popped into my head. But there are people on the margins who are only able to sustain a life, or maybe only sustain a normal life, because of modern technology, because of the abundance that we have here in the West. The same people, if they lived in rural Mongolia, probably wouldn't enjoy, the same level of health. And then you've got just the mass starvation that will come from the lack of transportation and the lack of food production. And so there's a lot of horrible things on the way if these people continue to execute their plans. However, if you're able to weather that, if you are in decent health, if you have some way of obtaining food, or the worst case scenarios, if you have a way of generating your own electricity, that would be great too. I think there will be a light at the end of the tunnel. And the light at the end of the tunnel will be a fossil fuel renaissance. After the complete devastation of the West and the very clear elevation, the ascension of the East, once China becomes the undisputed global superpower, with the Russians standing by their side as their top lieutenants in their, not global empire, I don't think the Chinese want a global empire, but in their, let's say, regional empire. I mean, I say regional, I mean it's continent-wide. China's already huge, Russia's huge, and the countries that they would want to influence would be all the countries around them. So that's a pretty big part of the planet. You perhaps could compare it to, the communist bloc during the Sino-Soviet alliance. Back when you had Mao and Stalin, a huge chunk of the earth was aligned under the flag of communism. I don't think that there's going to be, that the Russians are going to turn communist or something like that, or that the Chinese are going to force all the countries around them to adopt, communism or something like that. The Chinese don't even really believe in that anymore. It's more of a vestigial organ of their own state. But anyway, while that's going on, while they're consolidating their influence in their part of the world, once they no longer have to worry about the U.S. Navy, patrolling the Pacific Ocean as if it's an American lake, Europe will simply fall into the Atlantic. It's going to sink. Not literally, but figuratively. It will be as if it's not really there. It is not going to matter. And maybe someday they will be able to crawl out of this hole, but not before the United States, clearly. I mean, the people in Europe are just too far gone. The problem is the people. I mean, if the Great Reset were going to work anywhere, and by work I mean, like, be accepted, it would be Germany. But I don't want to talk about worst-case scenarios right now. Or I don't want to talk about the bad, and I want to talk about where there's hope. And the hope, I do still think, is going to be in the United States. The United States is wide. It's quite populated, but it's not quite densely populated. There are vast swaths of America that are only loosely controlled as it is by the United States government. And in the event of an economic, social, and political collapse engineered by the proponents of the Great Reset, the vast majority, or I shouldn't even say vast majority, the overwhelming portion of the American landmass, pretty much all of Alaska, and in entire states in continental America will be completely ungoverned. Furthermore, there will be places that are populated, that are governed, but not by people who are aligned with this movement to destroy our society. And in those places, such as where I live here, people most certainly will not go along with the Great Reset plan of rebuilding. The goal of rebuilding will be to reclaim the old abundance which will have been lost in the process of the collapse. People will still remember what it was like when you walked into the grocery store and there was just food, any kind of food you wanted, on the shelves at any given time, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. And in a state like Florida, which has pretty much zero traditional urban areas, I mean, we have a couple that are very, very old, but for the most part, Florida was all built after World War II. It was designed for every person to own an automobile. And so, in other words, you're not going to be able to talk people just into taking, the electric bus or something like that. Additionally, Florida was settled almost entirely after the onset of air conditioning. There are very few people, such as my grandparents, who remember the days before air conditioning. The fact is, before air conditioning, people simply did not want to live here. And in order to power air conditioning systems, it requires tremendous amounts of electricity. And unlike for automobiles, there is no readily available alternative to electricity for powering air conditioning systems. There are no coal-fired air conditioners. You can't just light a fire in your fireplace with wood that you chopped in the backyard. That will make your house hotter, not colder. And most people here, despite what the Californians might want, most people keep their air well below 78 degrees Fahrenheit. And so what does all this mean? In short, if there's a collapse, which that's where they're pushing us, they're engineering one right before our eyes. OPEC is cutting oil production. Nord Stream 1 is offline. The Europeans are still as pig-headed as ever, and they're going to start. Oil is a global market. Natural gas is a global market. We are going to suffer their consequences. Even if our government here in the U.S. wasn't as bad as it is, wasn't as, pro-green as it is, the Europeans are going to bleed us dry. And that's particularly unfortunate for a state like Florida, where I believe 75% of our electricity is generated by burning natural gas. So, in the event of a collapse, in the event of a breakdown in global markets, in transportation, I think that offshore drilling in the Gulf will become very popular here. It's kind of been a taboo ever since the BP oil spill, but if people don't have air conditioning, they're going to get over their phobia of oil wells off the coast of Florida. I mean, you can't even see them from the coast, I don't think. But again, it's a minor thing. People just think, ooh, oil's icky. I want to go to the beach and not see any oil. These are luxuries. Just like, every so-called green policy. And that's the problem that the Great Reset folks face. The Great Reset itself is a luxury. Very few people have the luxury, as it is, of supporting the Great Reset. Excuse me, I just barely was able to to get that sneeze out of there. You might have heard the start of it. But anyway, back to the luxury of the Great Reset. Very few people can afford to support it now because they know what it would mean for them. It would mean a life of austerity, and for their children and their children's children. But once people are already living an austere lifestyle, they're not going to aspire to the Great Reset. No, they're going to reach out for the lowest hanging fruit. And is the lowest hanging fruit windmills and solar panels that generate a meager amount of electricity? Is the lowest hanging fruit electric cars that are astronomically priced and are ridiculous to maintain when the batteries go out because you basically have to buy a new car? No, they're going to reach for oil. They're going to reach for natural gas. They're going to reach for coal. They're going to reach for air conditioning. They're going to want to turn down the thermostat. That is, if the corporate oligarchs haven't locked them out of their thermostat, which of course we saw this past week in Denver. Their thermostats were locked to no lower than 78 degrees. So, in other words, I think that at the end of the day, we're not going to end up with some green utopia, Great Reset dystopia. We're going to live in a comparatively so-called dirty society with pretty much zero environmental regulations, where everyone is well-fed, has a good-paying job, and can afford to pay their rent or their mortgage on time. I think that the pendulum swings back the other way as hard as possible. I mean, like Oliver Twist, Industrial Revolution kind of intensity. So I'm afraid the fourth Industrial Revolution won't look quite like what Klaus Schwab imagined. I think it'll look a lot more like the first Industrial Revolution, first or second, I don't know which one they call it. But basically the dirtiest and the most intense, because I think people will be working as fast as possible to try to reclaim our lost abundance. Maybe in Vermont, people will, choose the Great Reset over abundance. Maybe in Massachusetts or Connecticut, but not here, not in Tennessee, not in Indiana, not in West Virginia, not in Texas, I don't even think. I don't know, maybe Georgia? Hard to imagine. I think that Georgia probably would just devolve into chaos itself. Greater Atlanta would become an island of chaos, surrounded by people who just will not listen to them and want to live their lives and burn oil. So, with that said, I think I'm going to continue to try and develop this idea in my head and really think things through, because I've been way too focused on the present for a long time now. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.